Opening traps are a quick and easy way to win in chess. However, most traps work on this formula. If opponent plays X, then I can deploy the trap and win the game. If they don't, then I have a worse position. In today's video, I will explain 5 traps which give a good position even if the opponent doesn't fall for them. So these traps are designed so that if the opponent doesn't fall for these traps, your position won't be completely deteriorated. Let's begin. Hey guys, my name is Ishan and in today's video, I am explaining 5 opening traps which don't get your bad position even if the opponent doesn't fall for them, but really have some juicy prizes if the opponent does. Let's begin with the first trap. So this trap is called the Queen's Gambit Decline trap, as I like to call it, or the Cambridge Springs trap. It begins with d4, d5, c4, e6, which is the Queen's Gambit's decline, knight c3, knight f6, bishop g5, which is the mainline theory of the Queen's Gambit decline. And normally here the theory continues bishop e7. However, we can play knight b d7. Now for those of you who play this opening, you might be familiar that knight b d7 comes later anyway in this setup, as we don't want to block our c pawn, which is a very valuable resource in these type of openings. That is why we play knight b d7. But here usually in this position we play bishop e7 first so as to get out of the pin immediately. However, by playing knight b d7 we set a trap, and it sets a trap which doesn't harm our position. For example, if there was a trap in something like b5, obviously if the opponent doesn't fall for it, it's got to be bad, right? So we're not playing anything out of the way like that. It's just normal opening move which has a sneaky idea behind it. So what's that idea? As you can see, and I have highlighted on the board as well, the d5 pawn suddenly looks like it's hanging because the bishop is pinning the knight here, and there's only one support where there are 2 attacks because the knight does not count as a defender. So what white will think is that he can just take c into d5 and will be like, okay fine, you can take it. Now when he plays knight takes d5, we play knight into d5. So we shock the opponent by sacrificing our queen. He takes bishop into d8 and now we play bishop b4 check. As you can see, white has no legal moves other than to give up his own queen with queen d2, and after bishop into d2, king into d2, king into d8, you can see that black is a whole piece up for just a pawn. A brilliant trap to win right out of the opening. I have deployed it quite a few times myself and I sure hope that you can too. Oh, and let's not forget what to do if the opponent doesn't fall for the trap. Well, in this position, some standard moves can be e3, when you can play c6 or bishop e7 depending on what you play, and it's a pretty good position out of the opening. They can also avoid the trap after cd5, ed5 and play something like e3 again, when again c6 is mainline theory of the Queen's Gambit decline exchange variation and black is absolutely fine. Moving on to trap number 2. Trap number 2, the Noah's Ark trap. This trap comes out of a variation of the Ruy Lopez, which is after bishop b5, black plays a6, white goes bishop a4, and now black plays the sneaky move d6. So normally if black would have played d6 here, then white's most common move in the theory is to play d4 and immediately take advantage of the fact that our knight is pinned. So what we do is we first insert the sneaky a6, bishop a4 and now d6. And now if they become tempted to play d4, then we can play b5. Obviously they have to save their bishop, and now we take knight takes d4. After he takes the obvious knight d4, we take e into d4. And now white is left with a puzzling choice. Should he take the pawn? Well, if he does, then my friend, he has fallen right for the trap. We play c5, and the threat is, of course, let's say if the queen moves somewhere, we'll play c4 and this bishop is trapped. So maybe he'll try queen d5 to try and fork our pieces. But we have the clever defense bishop e6, which defends both f7 and a8 indirectly. Maybe he'll try queen c6 check to make us move our king or block with the queen when he can trade and then get his bishop to safety. But no, we play bishop d7 and attack the queen again. The queen has to move. Where does it go? Maybe it'll go back to d5 thinking that we'll repeat with bishop e6. But this time we play c4, and that, my friends, is the end of the b3 bishop. You are a piece up for, I'd say, 2 pawns after this sequence of moves. And maybe even white maybe even lost his castling rights after bishop b5. So this is just game over. Now let's look at what happens if he doesn't fall for the trap. If he doesn't take queen d4, then after, let's say, bishop d5, we can play rook b8, and after queen d4, knight f6, and this position is roughly equal, which is a great result out of the opening for black. Moving on to trap number 3. Trap number 3, the legal's mate. This mate happens from a variation in the Guico piano. So white plays e4, black plays e5, we have knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, the Italian game. Black plays d6, and now white plays knight c3, a standard developing move. Now here, if black were to play bishop g4, and this is a slight inaccuracy, we play h3, and for those of you who know the legal's mate, we cannot play directly knight into e5 here, as after knight e5 he defends his bishop. So that is why we first play h3, asking him the question of where he wants to take his bishop. Ideally the best move here would be to take on f3, but then we would have the bishop pair out of the opening with a great position. So the logical move for black would be to play bishop h5. But this, my friends, falls right into the trap. Can you see how white wins? That's right. White plays knight takes e5, a shocker. And when black takes our queen, thinking that we blundered, we give him the shock of his life by playing bishop f7 check. And after king e7, which is the only move, yes, you guessed it, knight d5 is a beautiful checkmate from the opening. So that, my friends, is the legal's mate. Let's look at a few variations if the opponent doesn't fall for the trap or doesn't fall for the mate version of it. Instead of bishop h5, he can also play bishop e6, when after bishop b3 our position is absolutely brilliant. I would say even it's better for white after the opening, because black wasted a move with his bishop while we got the useful h3 in with a tempo. And after bishop h5, knight e5, if he decides to play knight e5, thinking that our bishop on c4 is also hanging, we play queen into h5, he takes knight c4, and now queen b5 check, queen d7, queen into c4, and white maintains his extra pawn with a great game. Let's move on to trap number 4. So trap number 4 is another trap in the Queen's Gambit decline, but this time it's in the exchange variation, and this time it's white who is trapping the black pieces. We have the standard Queen's Gambit exchange on the board. After knight c3, knight f6, bishop g5, c6, the standard move, e3, bishop e7, knight f3, all standard opening theory, knight bd7, bishop d3, a6 is an unconventional move but played many times at the top level, even by Bronstein himself. Queen c2, we have castles, rook e8, rook ac1, and now knight e4 is a bit of a mistake here. I would not say mistake really, because it's an inaccuracy. So here, this actually happened in a game between Alekhine and Bronstein. What Alekhine played was bishop f4, a very sneaky move. Seems like he just wants to avoid trading pieces because of his evident space advantage and black's pieces are cramped and so on. And here Bronstein played the blunder f5. Now obviously he can take knight c3, and after b c3 white is doing pretty well, I'd say, with c4 coming up. And he could also retreat, but although that wouldn't make a lot of sense now, would it? So as most of us would, Bronstein played f5. Can you spot white's win? Yes, that's right, friends. We play knight takes d5, and after cd5 we have bishop c7, which is a beautiful queen trap. Let's move on to trap number 5. So here we have the Albin counter gambit trap, which is actually a counter gambit to the Queen's Gambit. I know it sounds really messy, but you'll understand once it's on the board. d4, d5, c4, the Queen's Gambit, and the Albin counter gambit begins with e5. So black's idea of this opening is, if white gambits a pawn, I'll gambit another pawn. So d takes e5, d4. So we're preventing the knight on b1 from escaping to c3. and therefore it's very difficult for white to make a choice of how to develop his pieces. What most people would do is try to challenge the d4 pawn with e3, which is in fact a bit of a mistake, as you will see. Okay, if he plays knight f3, then after knight c6, the mainline theory continues, and black is doing fairly alright, with lots of initiative in this gambit counterline. However, if he were to fall for the trap with e3, we play bishop b4 check. Any person in their sane mind would play bishop d2, as if you play knight bd2, then d takes e3 and your pawn structure isn't what I would call neat. So most people will play bishop d2, and now we play the shocking t takes e3. The bishop on b4? Oh, it's hanging? Let it be. That's what our plan is here. So the point is, if he takes our bishop with bishop into b4, can you spot the win? It's a tricky one, and this is probably my favorite trap in terms of beauty. And yes, you're right, it is e takes f2 check. Obviously, if the king takes back on f2, then the queen on d1 is left defenseless. So he'll have to play king e2, and now we play f into g1 equals knight check. Brilliant move. The point is, if we promote to a queen, then he can just trade and then take, and I think white is doing alright. So that is why we take with a check. And again, he cannot capture our knight because of bishop g4, which is a skewer. So he'll probably play something like king e1. And after queen h4 check, king d2, queen f4 check, the white king will be hunted, and black is also a piece up, but the extra piece being on g1. And I would prefer this position any day as black. Well, that's it for today, friends. Please make sure to like and subscribe so I can keep making content like this. And do stay tuned for part 2 of this best trap chess series. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.